Just going to quickly touch on the panel that we have immediately after I talk is going to be focused on data functionality. And I had a few people ask me who are going to be on that panel, what is data functionality? How did we get to where we are right now? I'm going to just touch on. It goes back about 4 years ago, just shy of 4 years ago, when CREB was looking at the need to replace our MLS system. Everybody remembers ML Exchange? Anybody not remember ML Exchange? Anybody want ML Exchange back? 2, okay. You have to leave. So when we started that process, we had a long-term vision or a goal in mind. And what that was to really create an environment where data, which is core to our business, became a lot more usable. And how we started to approach that was knowing that we needed to move from ML Exchange, which was an old, aging, dying MLS system, to a newer system which is going to enable us to do a lot more of what we wanted to do as we moved down the road. That process started 4.5 years ago, but we only rolled it out more recently because as CREB, what we did was we stepped back and we did a lot of work on the data architecture side ourselves and tried to take a look at how do we move forward, how do we make data work for us that we can make data work in a much bigger arena. And then you've seen that continue to progress as earlier this year, we changed all of our community boundaries and we aligned with the City of Calgary and made it possible to start pulling in third-party data and make it work with the MLS system data. The overall objective was how do we impact the consumers by empowering the agents who provide the mainstay of that information to the people who are looking to buy and sell their houses. So just to touch on a little bit of where we were, these are all houses. They're all in the same community. They all have very similar attributes. So I'll buy the third one because I don't really know anything else and I can dig into it and I can get a little bit more data, but this is the data that you're entering as you're collecting it from the house. And it tells me a little bit about that house. Just to touch on the video that Cliff played earlier, you know, when we think about the fact that we create 2.5 quintillion bytes of data a day, what does that really work out to? Well, you know, if we look at one of these listings for CREB, they've got about 480, 485-ish potential fields that you could fill in. If we do 40,000-ish average listings a year, it means we create almost 20 million pieces of housing data just in Calgary alone. And on a daily basis, where we're saying that we upload about 55 million photos, and there's all those selfies of you getting your Starbucks in the morning and dropping the kids off and now going home to delete your Twitter account so you're not being tracked by big data. How does that step back a little bit to be a little more relevant to what we do as real estate agents? Well, CREB uploads about 2,500 photos a day to Realtor.ca or through our system, and then to all the third-party sites that are getting feeds from us. And that's just CREB with 5,300 members. So we're going to hear from John later, but what is TREB with 50-ish thousand members uploading? And then what's 1.2 million members around North America uploading? The real estate industry generates a ton of our own data, but it's still only a subset or a fraction of what the data that we can use to find, buy, and sell houses is. So we go down a little bit more from those houses that we saw and we get to the really good data. Like now we're starting to explode that this is the house I want, because I'm looking at this, well, this output from a database that has a little bit more city information, some tax data, some stuff like that relevant to the property. And I am sure that this is the house I probably want to buy. Quite frankly, it's ugly. And it doesn't really tell us what we want to know. So what did we do when we moved to the matrix system? It was start to go down that path of how do we make data more accessible and how do we amalgamate and commingle data layering on top of the map. Unfortunately, we don't have any data layers in Matrix because CoreLogic wasn't able to create the data layers we were looking for. But the cool thing is it spawned CREB Maps, where we have taken our first step in. And who in here has used CREB Maps? Just a quick raise of hands. Who hasn't used Maps? Never logged into it? One member. Okay. So our objective there and where we are in phase one was really to take a bunch of data sets that we already have and that members are using, and they're going to tool A and tool B and tool C and tool D and pulling that together to get an idea of what a house looks like. And we started to move into what as we step back when we look at the community. If I'm going to buy a house, do I want to take a look at the community first and I have an idea of where I'm going? Sure. So here we can highlight the community we want to take a look at and start to get some high-level information in one spot. Now we might want to know what's going on with the communities around that community, so we can explode that out a little bit and we can look at heat maps that give us an idea of what's going on in the community. Has anybody seen this yet? Because it's coming next month. But we'll be a little bit slower with permit history. Fortunately, after we do move on, Cliff will get his permit history, and I will be a little bit less egg on face, I guess you could say. So here we go, we're pulling it together, we're starting to get an idea of what does a community look like. The individuals highlighted a community they want to see, but now we're starting to pull together some information that you will get for the surrounding communities. And you find that house that you wanted to look at. Now you're getting it in a visual perspective, you're in one tool, and you've got the bar on the side, which is starting to pull together some additional information. Now, for everybody that's used it, as you continue to scroll through this, you're seeing already that there's a lot more data coming into it than just what we have in the MLS system today, because we're pulling in that Google data, so you know what schools are in the neighborhood. You can highlight and see which transit stops are in the neighborhood. You can start to pull up which restaurants are in the neighborhood. Everything that you want to know that we can pull from Google is in there. We also have our tax data from the City of Calgary that we're pulling in, additional data that we're getting from the City of Calgary, including property data that will be coming into the future. But we're layering it all into one spot and letting you drill down. And then going into a specific property report which highlights all that information, which you're going to be able to send out. Now, the objective really was, how do you take all this data that you'd have to go to 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 different pieces or data points and pull it together and give it to somebody, which we've got members that do it. We've got members that probably do a really good job of it. If you're sitting in your car and you're looking at a house in a neighborhood and you move over 3 blocks and then you're asked, what about that house? Can you pull all that data together and provide it at that moment? The answer is no. But now with an iPad, if you can go on and you can click on that property and you can explode out all the data that you want for that property, that community, etc., and do it in real time, we're giving you the ability, or we're empowering the agent to start to impact that buying, selling experience on behalf of the consumer. So here's our initial take, and Jonathan's stuff is amazing, and to see where they're going in the United States is awesome, and it's really focusing on empowering the agent on that back-end piece to continue your data planning and know what you're doing, knowing and kind of looking at the restrictions and problems and doing a lot of that in Canada. Where we started to go was, how do we have a consumer-centric approach which is going to make that buying and selling a lot easier? And today we're giving you the ability to look at it. Next year, or where we're going to be starting to go with it, is how does that experience really change as you talk to a consumer who wants to buy a new house? And today we ask them, where do you want to live? Because they're going to know this community is close to my work, and I want 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, quiet cul-de-sac, thank you very much. But does that really play into everything that they might think about if they had the ability to say, well, I need 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, and I want to be 20 minutes from work, and I have to go past the day home where I want to drop my kids off, and I'd ideally like to pass a Starbucks on the way to work, and I want to live near a dog park because I'm going to take my dog for a walk every Saturday morning, and start to build this into your search criteria, that you get the lifestyle approach that meets a house that's got some very basic features like 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and I have a dining room table that would fit the Knights of the Round Table, so I'm obviously going to need a dining room too. All that stuff we have, but pulling it together into a bigger picture and making it usable and accessible and making the consumer's experience really tailored to them is the objective of what data functionality meant to us here at CREB. So kind of a primer where we're at, what we're doing, is really going to lead into how do other sources use the data and augment it and start to make it work in a functional way for them. And with that, I will move on to our panel. So I'm going to call up our first individual, who is Brian DeShepper. Brian has a vast experience in the real estate vertical. He's a principal and executive officer at Terrasoft, creators of the Terrasoft Matrix MLS platform, the #1 MLS platform in North America. As a senior corporate executive with CoreLogic, he was tasked with developing an aggressive go-to-market strategy to deploy the TerraSoft Matrix MLS system solution to approximately 700,000 CoreLogic MLS customers. Currently, Brian's Director, MLS and Industry Relations for the Zillow Group based in Seattle. Brian is responsible for all aspects of Zillow relationships with many of the largest MLS providers across the United States and Canada. Brian is also a senior manager in the Retzly division at Zillow. Retzly is a safe and transparent platform that allows software developers to create beautiful real estate software. Brian's also currently exploring the possibility of offering select Zillow services in Canada. Our next panelist is going to be John DeMichel. John entered the real estate profession as a salesperson and later worked 5 years as a broker manager before entering the Toronto Real Estate Board staff as Chief Information Officer in 2002. John served in several capacities on a wide range of committees and board of directors as realtor of 3 real estate boards and other organizations of varying sizes. In 2009, John was moved into the Associate CEO role, and in July 2014, John was promoted to the position of Chief Executive Officer. As CEO, one of his key priorities has been to better understand and optimize the economic competitiveness and livability of the Greater Toronto Area and the wider Greater Golden Horseshoe region. That is a mouthful of responsibility. In this regard, he initiates and spearheads TREB's inaugural Market Year in Review and Outlook Report 2015, which, in part, consults stakeholders from various sectors across the region on key areas of improvement for a better future. John brings together a wealth of professional experience, the practitioner's perspective, and an intimate understanding of the real estate landscape. Lisa is the City of Calgary's Program Manager for Data Analytics Calgary and Manager of Innovation, Data, and External Access, otherwise known as IDEA, which is a really cool title, which oversees 6 unique initiatives that are changing the way the City of Calgary thinks about data, collaboration, research, and innovation with their staff and citizens. With over 25 years of municipal government experience, Lisa leads a team of civic superheroes who are driven by passionate curiosity. These municipal change agents are challenging the cultural norms that many municipalities easily slip into. Through award-winning dashboards for data-driven decision-making, advanced analytics that recommend optimal staffing levels for return on investment, an innovative program that actively engages over 2,000 employees, Lisa and her team of superheroes are blazing a trail for impactful innovation in Canadian government. And the last panelist that we're going to have joining us again is Jonathan Spinetto, who I don't believe requires any additional introduction at this point. What does data functionality mean to you? And in that, maybe you could just give a quick overview of what each of your organizations does and how you use data in your day-to-day.
Who do you want to start?
Let's go with Zillow.
Price check, aisle 1. I think everyone can hear me. Yeah, thanks, Shane. First of all, I just want to say how great it is to actually be here today. I'm actually very familiar with this board. A few years ago, I worked with Alan and Shane on your Matrix agreement. That's when I was part of the Matrix team at CoreLogic, and before that, of course, I was at TerraSoft. That was mentioned in the opening on me. But it's really great. I mean, big data, I think, is just a huge thing right now. I now work with Zillow Group. I'll talk about how Zillow utilizes big data in just a moment here, but it's really great that this board is doing this. This is the first board that I've come across anywhere in North America, and I travel basically weekly, that's doing a panel like this, and I think this is kind of the beginning. We're going to see a lot more of these kind of panels on the national scene, and I think also in local real estate boards and MLSs across North America, but kudos to the Calgary Real Estate Board to be the first to do this. I think it's really, really great. As far as how Zillow utilizes data, I mean, Zillow's really, really big. You know, Zillow's not in Canada yet, as most of you know. So maybe I'll just explain for just a really brief second what Zillow is. I mean, Zillow is basically just a mega kind of advertising company. So if you were to go back, 10 or 15 years ago in the real estate space, most real estate agents and brokers advertise their listings in newspapers. What Zillow is today, they're basically that newspaper. Everyone knows that newspaper advertising in real estate is pretty well dead, and pretty well all of the listings today have moved to the web. So what Zillow does, of course, is it's created in the United States this incredible kind of ecosystem or this marketplace where where consumers can engage with working professionals, with real estate agents and brokerages. And the way they do that is by utilizing big data, a lot of obviously listing data, a lot of public record data. And what they've done is they've created this incredible website that consumers in the United States have just absolutely flocked to essentially start their search with real estate. What's so incredible about that Zillow website is if you look at May of this year, they had 171 million unique visitors travel to the Zillow websites or web brands, starting their search on real estate. And that's an incredible number considering that there's 350 million American people. To have 170 million unique visitors to their website in 1 month is pretty incredible. So really Zillow is all about data. They've certainly created this incredible kind of platform where consumers obviously really feel very comfortable and really enjoy learning about real estate. But really, outside of the platform, it's all about data. It's all about real estate data. It's all about public record data and a whole bunch of other kind of big data sets. But Zillow is nothing without data. So that's really, in a really quick kind of overview, a little bit about Zillow, but how important big data is to Zillow, especially in the real estate space.
Step down the line to John.
Sure. Good morning. Thank you for having me here. It's always a pleasure to come and speak to realtors. And as you heard in my bio, I was a realtor and I still am somewhere branded with that R. It's annoying from time to time, but it does give me that perspective. I think the greatest compliment I was ever paid while I was in the role was by Costa. And Costa's a director on the CREA board. And Costa, after a conversation one day, he goes, you still think like a realtor. And I think that's where data functionality goes to me. I think of data functionality as how do I empower the member? How does the member have the ability to do their jobs efficiently, effectively, and with the least amount of intrusion from someone like me who gets in their way? And that's not the idea. The idea is not to get in the person's way. The idea is to release that within the limits of the law. And you'll hear more about that later when I get up to speak. I was saying earlier to Anne-Marie that, there was a day when I was a young, happy guy. Alan, you remember those days, don't you? But things have changed substantially for us at TREB. And I still have the ability to create and look at data from a perspective of what works best, and how to make it effective. And I think the thing that really I'm most proud of is we have this one particular feature called Unified Search in our Connect system. It took me about 3 minutes to actually draw up the architecture and get people to actually buy in. And it cost us about, less than $20,000 to put it together. And what it does is it looks at all the data from 25 disparate boards and plot it on a map, and then you click on one and up comes the record. That's what I think data functionality should be. How do you get it to work in a way that is effective for the person, the member on the street? And that's my approach.
Please.
Thank you. I am not a realtor. However, I have the MLS app on my phone for as long as I've had a phone. And I have a 6 degrees of separation to Alan Tennant because he showed me some of my first houses when we first started out looking for houses years ago and ran into each other at the CREA conference this year. What I think data functionality means to the City of Calgary is that over the years we've collected millions and trillions of pieces of data. At the beginning, 20 years ago, we didn't know exactly why we were collecting it, what we were going to use it for at some point. And so one of the pieces of the program that I lead started a year ago. And it was with the vision that we have a lot of data that people would be interested in, citizens would be interested in, businesses would be interested in, and it can help drive the economy. So one of the things that we focused on was our new open data catalog, which will very excitingly launch at the end of this month on the 29th. That means that we will have data sets ready for public access that have what's called APIs and allow real-time data to be flowing through. That's an exciting new piece that we didn't have the ability to do before. As well, the data sets or the data catalog will be federated, which means that we will be linked up with other municipalities that also have data, which gives you an even more robust catalog of data to look at for Alberta. We are leading a regional partnership around data and working with our community partners from surrounding communities to get their data up and ready to go. As well, we will be able to host Calgary economic development data, data that's produced around economic outlook, pieces of data that you will be very interested in. And when you bring it into your site, making sure that our data is ready to go and is as robust as possible is really important to us because we see it as a driver for economic development in this area. And Analytics Calgary has really unlocked that data. Instead of individual business units owning the data, the city is looking at it from a holistic approach and defaulting to open where possible.
Anything to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, data functionality, I look at it from an agent standpoint as a practitioner. How can that data assist me in my day-to-day, as I mentioned earlier, but also too from the brokerage level, right? You know, who do I need to be talking to internally in my own office that may not be doing as well as he or she could be? Who should I need to be talking to through other offices? Because again, whether you look at your role as an agent, as the broker manager, that data functionality can mean different things. But the core commonality across all of that is the ability to easily understand that data in a method that allows you to have that intelligence. And that it has to be simple and it has to be easy access, like John was mentioning, searching 25 different data sets at the same time. That's a core of being able to take action off of that big data.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to just jump on into kind of a next question of, while you're all using data and you've touched on how you're using it in slightly different ways, for each of you, what's the biggest barrier to doing what you're trying to do today or where you're trying to go in data functionality in your organizations? Why don't we start with John? He's got a smile out of him on that one. So.
Wow, great question. I would suggest the barrier is unwilling partners. If we actually had a lot more willing partners that were less sensitive to their desire for profit, or perhaps even giving us the ability to leverage something that's already been paid for. There are a lot of opportunities out there, but in order to really get the job done and to be able to do what we see in the United States here, those barriers are definitely there. But I think also just the temperament of the people today. There's certain things that people, you felt some interesting feelings earlier in the last presentation, and that's the way that people are thinking today. They don't want their privacy breached, and we'll get into that in a bit, but really those are the barriers that I see, is not technology. Technology is making it easier and easier every day.
I would say from our perspective, it's a double-edged sword of privacy legislation and people's comfort level with releasing information. Our Canadian privacy legislation is very conservative compared to the Americans, and the Patriot Act gives them a lot more freedom with that information. I was just at a meeting last week talking about with my counterparts on how we can influence the very conservative nature of our privacy legislation to open it up a little bit to allow for how the trends are moving with data in Canada. Some of those things that will need to happen in Canada are that we need to build our own cloud infrastructure here, because as soon as the data crosses into the US, there's different rules that apply, and those make people very nervous here. So I would say that there's a barrier to people, a fear around releasing data, even internally between business units, and because we don't know what every business unit is going to do with it. And then there's also a fear in releasing it into the public, because we don't know what data sets they have that they're going to put it with that may identify our citizens in some way.
I think from a Zillow perspective, the big challenge with data is actually just access to data, right? I'm really talking from a Zillow perspective here, but like I mentioned earlier, Zillow's created this incredible kind of consumer marketplace, and it's funny for me because I've got to know a lot of the MLSs, a lot of the real estate boards across both Canada and the United States. And it's amazing to me sometimes, as Zillow approaching these real estate boards and requesting access to data to essentially be a good citizen and sign these third-party access agreements, that these boards will actually kind of bunker down and say, well, no, for whatever reason, we don't want to provide our access of our data to Zillow, to consumers. And I find that kind of a strange kind of feature out there that we're coming across at Zillow. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about Zillow and what Zillow does. Zillow's not a real estate agent. They're not a brokerage. They're not an MLS. They're just this kind of consumer marketplace where we connect consumers with working professionals. And I get the fact that there's maybe many brokerages or agents that don't want to participate on a site like Zillow. And that's fair, and I think that's fine, and there's no issue with that. But then there's also a certain amount of that population that does want to participate with Zillow. And to have an MLS or a real estate board kind of unilaterally make a decision on behalf of all of its members not to provide access for those willing and able brokerages and agents, I think that's a little bit frustrating from our perspective. And I think especially in today's day and age with millennials, I mean, this millennial generation is this huge generation. If you look at the baby boomer generation, which is kind of my generation, and the Generation Xers, they're retiring at 50,000 a week right now in North America. And what's coming up in that wake is this millennial generation. And the millennials, what's so amazing about them is they kind of grew up in this era of technology. So if it's an iPhone or if it's Facebook or if it's Instagram, they're very comfortable and they're used to it. And they kind of demand this kind of open access to data. And I think these industries, and it's partly happening in the real estate industry. It really depends, which board you jump to. And of course, I travel all over the place. Some are totally get it and understand it and say, yes, for sure. We want to, kind of promote this idea of empowering consumers with real estate information that, connects, again, the working professional with consumers. And then, of course, you hit some of these that for whatever reason, they have their knickers in a knot, so to speak, and they don't want to do it. And it's very interesting to me, because I think the travel industry went through this 20 years ago, and it didn't really end well for the travel industry. And I think if you look at things like Uber and some of these other industries, I think we have to be very cognizant of that, kind of what's trending out there with big data, kind of the changing demographic, and hopefully have a very open mind moving forward. But that would be it from kind of a Zillow perspective.
Well, not to harp on access to data, but obviously there's so many different data sets out there, and again, it is access to that data, which a lot of times requires cleaning so that it can be usable for various things. But also too, from a different perspective as well, when we talk about some of these machine learning and other neural net type of algorithms and stuff, actually access via API is great for displaying on a map, but if we want to ingest that data into an algorithm, we have to run large amounts of data that makes it impossible to access it by API, because we would really put a lot of hurting on that. And also too, folks that do provide data by API will have limits, right? So it's access to that data in a licensable type of manner that can be then used for ingestion. And at the same time, data access aside, it's the understanding of the industry, right? The industry has to want to go down this path, right? The industry has to want to layer in this data, and the industry wants to understand predictive analytics for real estate and how it fits into your day-to-day businesses. Because if the industry doesn't really want to push it, then there's some great data visualization tools. But if the industry wants to accept it, then we can really start doing some very neat, game-changing things as we begin to utilize this data for the industry.
Great. I just want to kind of circle back then a little bit because I know it's been touched on a few times. Jonathan, you touched on it earlier with data for sale and buying data. John, you touched on it with people realizing that their data has value, and it sounds like for the most part we've heard across the board that the barrier is really people wanting to give away their data. Do you think boards and organizations realizing that their data has a monetary value has further hurt that, or are we seeing sharing become more open?
I think it's evidenced by the upstream initiatives in the States. We're listening really carefully to those brokers who say, we create that data, we want to be the ones that monetize it. All the other arguments surrounding upstream, in my opinion, are not as truthful as that statement. So when they pull it back, which I think is the ultimate intent, that way, under the guise of being able to share it easier, I think what they're saying is, this is our data, we control it, it's worth a lot of money.
I would agree. Real estate data from the real estate community is broker data, and I completely agree with John here on that.
I'm surprised.
No, I do. But I think the big thing is, I think if you look at the big brokerages, the franchises, and all of the big players, especially in the United States, they want to bring it all in and control it, which is great. But how it fundamentally changes the industry, I'm not so sure if you're going to see that much of a change. I mean, if you're a brokerage, right, you want as much exposure to your real estate data as you possibly could get out there, and I think in a lot of ways that's already happening today. I think the upstream initiative is a really good initiative, and I think even from a Zillow perspective, we have these huge kind of network of kind of relationships with brokers and franchises, and most of them are directly engaged. I would say 90% of them are directly engaged with Zillow. So from our perspective, I mean, we're also a proponent of upstream.
Great. So we're in Canada. Zillow and Trev are agreeing.
Absolutely.
Looking like a bright new future. I'm going to throw you on the spot, Brian.
I was going to make an announcement.
Yeah, we have an announcement. We're going to do this combined announcement today. Should I? Or
we're getting married, right?
Yeah, well, only in Ontario, I think, for that. But
Apparently.
Yeah, I'm going to throw you on the spot on that one because you talked about a lot of what's going on in the United States. We are in Canada. You mentioned, not Canada right now, and is that a market that's going to open up for Zillow and having access to that data? Zillow just released what I believe was their first market report in the United States where they're updating on what's going on in the marketplace. Do we see Zillow expanding in the United States in their offering and moving into Canada?
It's a really great question. And, first of all, I live in Canada. I live in Victoria, British Columbia, so I am a Canadian. So for sure, I mean, as far as Zillow's kind of ambitions in Canada, they're definitely taking a very close look at this market. They asked me to do a little bit of a study back in May and June to determine, kind of what the kind of temperature was in Canada for a product like Zillow. It was really interesting because I talked to a lot of different boards. I talked to Alan, I talked to John, talked to most of the primary boards across Canada. I think the one thing you're going to find is, for sure, Zillow will come to Canada in some shape or form. I think they're going to do it very different than how they did it in the United States. I think the approach will be much more kind of MLS driven or real estate board driven, meaning that we we want to partner with the real estate boards. In the United States, they did a little bit different. They kind of partnered with the brokerage community, but I think in Canada they'll likely have a different approach. As far as timing, it's really hard to know when. It was really interesting. A lot of you probably saw this in this last big U.S. election. The Zillow.com website, like the most searched real estate on Zillow.com was real estate in Canada, and of course there is no real estate in Canada like on the Zillow.com website. But for a few days there, I mean, the whole site just kind of erupted, and I couldn't help but think about that a little bit, thinking like, what an incredible opportunity, like just to get exposure, consumer exposure, U.S. people that who knows how many of them would actually move, but there would be a small percentage, right, of eyeballs from consumers onto your listings here in Canada, and especially in the big markets like Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, to some extent, maybe even a market like Montreal. So it was interesting because that just happened last week, and I don't think that was lost on anyone at Zillow. That like, wow, like this whole kind of concept of search on Zillow.com for listings in Canada is right there. So, I think it's kind of a timing issue. We still have a fairly big mandate to do some big things in the United States. We need to kind of complete that. It's interesting. I started with Zillow 2 years ago in October 2014. I was employee number 719. Today they got over 3,000 employees. So it's incredible to see their kind of growth just in the United States over that period of time. We do have a Canadian office. We have an office in Vancouver, which is interesting. I think we've got about 20 employees there. We actually already do offer Zillow services in Canada, and that might actually come as a surprise to a lot of you. But we have this little product called Retzly, and it's lit up in about 4 or 5 different Canadian markets. It's not Zillow.com. It's not about listings on a big portal website, but we have already kind of established some kind of strategic relationships with some boards in Canada. So something we're looking at. Not sure when the timing will be, but I'm sure it's safe to say that at some point it's coming. It's organized real estate here in Canada, great market. So love to be a bit more involved up here.
Great.
Yeah, no, I was gonna comment on earlier. You're talking about some of the data, and just from a practitioner standpoint, until it got really into this software industry related to the boards and the MLSs, never realized about that monetization. And you look at like the larger companies like CoreLogic, Black Knight, First American, they all monetize that MLS data in various ways. But as a practitioner, you don't see this, you don't understand where all that data is going, and that's where some of these initiatives from Upstream, Retzly, Trestle, and all these other ones brings in some data transparency as to where that MLS data is going to allow for opportunities around monetization, because that data is important. Without that MLS data layered on top, even inside our application, you have this great database, this foundational data set, but showing that MLS data in real time as to what's going on in the community as a licensed practitioner just takes it to a whole nother level. And there is huge opportunities for agents and boards with monetization of that data.
Good. I'm going to bounce over to you, Lisa, with another question, because I think you guys are doing something unique in the Canadian landscape, at least from the municipal level, which is opening up the data and having your open data portal. What are the thoughts on having restrictions on data or protection of data?
Well, we do have some restrictions on data. We also have something unique to Canada, which is called City Online, where we sell data that has been layered together and has a added benefit to the consumer. We have a unique agreement with CREB here in Calgary that we don't see across the rest of the country in talking to our counterparts, and that's our data sharing agreement. And we've recently added some data sets which used to be paid for data sets that are no longer paid for. So those are some savings that they'll see, the CREB members will see through our data sharing agreements. The reason we don't that we share data with CREB and don't monetize it is because we both gain a mutual benefit in understanding when houses sell and what those market rates are. It's been journey, and some of these data sets that are coming out have been pushed for by external folks like yourselves. You've been asking for them, and so we're putting them out there in multiple formats. And I think one of the things we've also added is a map gallery in GIS. And actually, not to say anything bad about Google, but our maps are more up to date than Google's maps, and they're about 6 weeks behind us. So use ours if you can. And we just released a solar potential map, which you can take a look at, and houses, you can see a house in a neighborhood, what solar potential it has. And with the increase of technology around solar and solar panels getting smaller, they're predicting they're going to be 1 foot by 1 foot. And as you see that is something that may drive sales in certain areas of folks that are interested in net zero homes. That data set was released 2 weeks ago, and we're getting about 30,000 hits a day. So it tells me that there's every time we put out new data, there's a rapid market for it.
Great. John, did you want to give your opinion?
In the perspective of getting access to data, there's one thing that we're really sensitive to, and that is, what is the member's focus, and are they suffering from some sort of change fatigue or information fatigue? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of there are a lot of data sets out there that we could get access to, but you start to decide what does the member really want, and we track their movement on our website. Where do they go? What do they really want to get at? What is the functionality that they want? And it's interesting, even though we have some amazing data sets, the only time that they really started going to it is when we put it right under their noses. Otherwise, they don't go searching. We had to create an interactive map to say, okay, here's what this does, here's what this does. And then once you scroll over, it tells you what it is, and you click it, it takes you right to it. So we have a tremendous amount of information already. We have probably, in my opinion, the best return on investment with respect to that aspect. It's a fundamentally flawed thinking to think that they're going to go and use everything. So we're very careful what we choose. We want to ensure that if we do bring something, that it is under their noses. I'll talk a little bit more about that, the whole concept of integration, without violating that data share concept and the use of APIs. But really, again, it comes down to, what do you want to get to? And what is the information that you want in order to create that transaction? So me making all this noise about, look at all the stuff that we have, and you not using it, frustrates everyone. So is the environment, should it be cleaner? Should it be, I love the idea that you're ahead of them on the maps. I'd love to find another mapping solution in our world. I hate dealing with those people. Is that being recorded? See, this is why if you want me to be frank, turn off. But there are some really fundamental things that happen out there that we look at and track, say, this would be amazing information, but will they use it? Yeah. So we look for it, we want it, but we're selective.
And to agree with that, I mean, it's, yes, you absolutely have to have a limit on how much data that you can put in. Because again, that information fatigue, paralysis by analysis, I mean, all these different things that can occur, you have to segment of what is going to provide value for the given business vertical that you're trying to focus on, right? Whether it's an agent, whether it's a broker, manager. There is so much data out there. From our basis, we have to look at a nationwide data set because there's over 3,200 counties, boroughs, parishes, independent towns, and cities in the United States. So it gets on a bigger scale. But yeah, you have to limit on how much you're going to put in to make sure that it is truly providing a value.
I just want to underscore the fact that we use big data to make decisions on big data.
Indeed.
I think from a Zillow perspective, this is kind of an interesting thing that Zillow's doing in the U.S. What they did a few years ago is they bought every single public record parcel in the United States from one of the big providers. It was a transaction that was probably in the hundreds of millions kind of area as far as actually how much it cost. And what they did is they, like Zillow, of course, you can look up any active listing, right? And there it is. You can see the active home anywhere in the United States. But you can also just type in any address in the United States, like for 123 Anywhere Street in any state, and this property record pops up. And what's really incredible talking about big data with what Zillow has done with this is over time, they started this initiative a few years ago. They started augmenting that public record with pictures and maps, and if they came across a piece of information, they would just kind of add it to that particular parcel. But what's really cool is what they did a couple of years ago. They decided to just let the general public know that, hey, we have basically your property, right? But if you'd like to claim it and own it, just log into Zillow and you can do that. And what's happened, and this is really, really cool, is there's about 120 million parcels in the United States. 60 million consumers have claimed their own property. And once you claim it, once you've gone through this kind of a claiming process, you can then kind of augment with what you see with kind of the truth of your own property. So if you've done a renovation, if you've added a bedroom or a bathroom, you can add that information. If you would like, you can add more pictures. But like I said, 60 million consumers have actually gone onto Zillow. They're actively engaged and they're augmenting their own properties with additional information. And part of the reason for that, they have this thing, as you probably all have heard, called a Zestimate, which is just an estimate of roughly what every property is worth. But if you claim your own property and you augment it with additional information, it instantly kind of updates the Zestimate. But it's a really interesting kind of phenomenon that's happening down there with Zillow, because it's kind of user-generated content, which is a really interesting part of big data, right? Facebook, all these other sites have it, but Zillow actually has it. And it's really interesting how that's evolving, like on that Zillow.com website. So it's kind of an interesting story I just thought I'd share, because it's amazing how many consumers are so interested in real estate and like to, kind of promote their own real estate to some extent. So.
Good. All right, wanted to keep a little bit of time at the end to go for questions. I got one last question, which we'll just run down the line, starting with Jonathan. But if you were Krebs and you had our vault of data, what would you do with it?
Oh man, there's so much that can be done analyzing that data to show out trends, to show out agent opportunities. It's actually funny you mentioned that. We actually have a couple associations in the United States that are asking us to use their association-related data to help model the agents. And not in any nefarious way, but what they're looking to do is to say, okay, as an association, we have certain services that we can offer to practitioners. So how do we know where to focus some of our services that we can offer to agents by understanding where those agents may be going in their particular real estate career? Because again, our actions can be modeled in that sense to say, okay, this person, let's market some of our tech services here. Let's market some of our design services here, and legal and training and ethical, all this other different things, where all of these different services that are offered by the association help understand the own association membership to make them better. And that's, I think really that's going to be one of the new things coming out there. And I'll report back on results as it starts happening.
Look forward to hearing. Lisa?
I think that, like John said, you have to serve up the data in a way that people will, makes it so easy for them, they almost can't not click on it. I think things like dog park locations and solar mapping are all very interesting and exciting, but if you had to click on multiple maps, you won't do it. I won't even do it. And, but if I could just click and say, oh, my property is walkable and this adds X number of dollars to my property, or this is solar enabled, or its solar potential is rated at this. I mean, if it's right there, I might be interested in that. And so I think The user interface is going to be important. Visualizing that data for people in a really consumable way is, I think, going to be key to moving forward with using your data effectively.
You should probably just give it all to me.
John?
Thank you.
You give it
I'll
to
take
me.
a copy too. I'll take a copy too.
Well, I would definitely make sure that it was all your data. That's one of the things that seems to be coming up. And then I look at it from, like the other two folks said, there's a lot of value in there. There's a lot of trends. There's a lot of information that you can use now that would help the practitioner give you the knowledge as well and be able to serve it up in a way that is a little bit more effective or efficient. There are a lot of efficiencies in the data. There's a lot of hidden information that I think one of the, I mentioned this yesterday, I was told by someone, by looking at their data, the data sets on agreements, so effectively the data itself, they were able to determine that a buyer or a seller doesn't think about the moving company till 20 days before it closes. On day 21, if a coupon arrives, they throw it in the garbage, but on day 20, they keep it. So those are the kinds of things that people are actually are willing to be able to understand and use. So I think the concept of mining, or at least looking, analyzing your own data is a strong concept.
From my perspective,
After you give it to me.
From my perspective, I just want to say what these real estate boards do across the country is absolutely incredible as far as data aggregation, all of them. The business rules associated with these MLS databases, the compliance. So what the net result is these real estate boarders are kind of the holy grail of real estate data right across this country. And it's kudos. I mean, what these guys do, what these real estate boards do, and I know because I built MLS systems for most of my life, is really incredible. And it's an incredible service to consumers and to the working professional. So I just wanted to say that because I think that's a really, really important point, what all of these boards across Canada do. But in my humble opinion, if I owned it, I would be augmenting the hell out of that database because it's so great that you got this base level of unbelievable real estate data, but I don't believe that on a go-forward basis, that's enough. I think when you look at a product like Remine and hopefully, I don't know if you'll have a chance to maybe do a little bit more of a dive into that product, and you see all this other data commingled with this MLS data. You see all the Airbnbs. Like that's such a great example, right? Like you need to have Airbnbs. This is just a very simple thing in my mind, but if you're searching an MLS database for active listings, right? It's a simple API, right, that should be in your MLS database. So, you have active, sold, pending, whatever you might have, canceled listings, but there should be an Airbnb button where it shows, where all the Airbnbs are in relation to the active listings. It's a very simple thing, but if I'm a consumer, I think that's kind of important information to me. And that's just such a simple kind of example of what I mean. You guys should be augmenting the hell out of these databases because if you don't, someone else is going to do it. I'm not suggesting it's Zillow. It won't be Zillow because Zillow is, I think, a great partner to the real estate space. But consumers need more and more information, and I think just core listing database is not enough on a go-forward basis. I think it's good enough for today, but I think on a go-forward basis, it's not enough. So that's what I would be looking at.
Great. Coming around to the interactive part. Questions? Got a question?
Thanks. This question for Jonathan. Just building on what you were mentioning there, Brian, is so we've been talking about residential mostly, but from a commercial aspect, especially, and this is where the Airbnb came into play, if I was somebody that was wanting to open a business, I think this idea of being able to see where there would be lacking particular business opportunities in an area, I'm just wondering if you use it for that purpose, right?
So we're working on a commercial functionality for our application for things just like that as it relates to occupancy, like in a given radius, things of that nature. But right now we focus on the residential market, but that is coming down the pike. But the same core data set, like right now in our program, if you went to a commercial building, we would have all that information on if it's multifamily occupants inside an apartment, if it's just a commercial shopping complex, as in who owns it, the debt against it, things like that, to be able to just already see that. So it's coming, it's just not right now in there.
Just at TREB, we've got, for commercial, we've got a tremendous amount of services. And one of them is that we create for commercial folks. We have heat maps that have a tremendous amount of information on them, probably somewhere in the order of 80 different data points that are captured in those thermal images. And they really do provide details as to traffic patterns, density, other demographic points, also concentration of built-out areas as well. All those data points we've been able to glean or buy, and we use Esri and several other mapping, DMTI or whoever they are.
Well, I just think there was probably tremendous opportunity for that.
There is, and we utilize that.
One of my questions is, you were talking a bit about, people putting in more data, consumers doing that. Well, what are you doing as far as quality control of that data, ensuring that what they're putting in really isn't garbage?
I think this may be a Zillow question, right? So yeah, so yes, it goes back to that. Yeah, the boards, no boards that I know allow consumers to touch listing data at this point, but for sure. So that whole little story that I mentioned about Zillow and allowing consumers to kind of access and kind of update new information. So all that information gets vetted on our side, but what's really cool, how they really deal with it. So there's basically, if you look at any particular property, there's all these columns of data. So it says, okay, this is what we know, that this property has 5 bedrooms as an example, and let's say four bathrooms. Well, there's an additional column when an owner actually claims the property, and it says, just right beside kind of the the Zillow column of data, and it says that the owner of the property makes these representations. So you could tell what we know as fact and what the owners are actually claiming to be as true as they know it. So we do kind of separate on a visual for consumers when they review properties, the 2 columns of data.
Lots of questions.
Hi, I'm Frank McCullough. Got a question for you, John. You're dealing with TREB, and you brought up actually one of the interesting questions in my mind about ownership. And I wonder if you could just summarize for me what you see as the state of ownership of data by the real estate boards in the country.
Can I save that question for later? If that's okay. I mean, there's so many layers to it. In dealing with our challenges, or I'll speak about the American experience now. If you were in NAR, at NAR, you would have heard their lawyer talk about photo copyright and how that's become a challenge there. We've had to drill down to the minutia of who owns what and where that ownership lies. So because that's a legal question, I'd prefer to do it when I do but I'll get to it, okay? That's okay.
We'll have a follow-up question for our people too. Anyone else?
Who was next? Sam?
Thank you. Stan Ostanti, looking at the stuff that Jonathan and Brian provide, you both work with property-centric databases, and I guess my question is, how do you provide that on an MLS system that's not property-centric? Like one, I think you understand the...
So we put a link inside Matrix, you click there, and you go right out of the Matrix MLS system. You're already authenticated, single sign-on, and it's frictionless. So there's integrations that we work to do with the MLS on the Matrix or Paragon or other platforms out there, so that the practitioner can be inside that Matrix environment. They can be looking at a listing inside Matrix, click one button, and they're immediately now looking at the data that Remine has on that property within just milliseconds. Because the authentication into our application is your MLS user ID and password. You do not have to set up a separate account because, again, it has to be a completely frictionless process.
I wonder if I can just add to that, because I think you bring up an incredibly great point. Like, property centricity, I think, is core to kind of the real estate future on a go-forward basis. Like, again, you know, not just from a Zillow perspective, but from a guy that's built MLS systems, one of the things that drives me crazy kind of in this real estate board world is this kind of notion of reinventing the wheel. You know, I get it. Like, this Calgary board is an incredibly progressive board, and they're obviously doing some incredible things with big data. I would just only hope that in today's world that you know, that they have conversations with a company like Remine, right? Because instead of going through all that cost of kind of inventing the wheel for the first time and bringing in all of this big data, it's not just a time issue, or not just a money issue, it's also a time issue. This whole kind of notion of partnerships, especially with a company like Remine, which is relatively small. I had the great pleasure of getting to know these guys about a year ago at a hackathon that Zillow sponsored. But you know, how quickly they can integrate some of the data that they have with a lot of the initiatives that are happening here in Calgary that I've been exposed to here today. It's incredible. I mean, you guys could be in 3 months like kind of leaders in the space, right? Yet if the board kind of makes a decision that, okay, well, we're just going to do this all on our own, right? And I don't think that's this board. Like, this board seems to be very good, especially with the municipality and all the rest of it. But you know, if you do it on your own, it just takes an enormous amount of time to bring that product to market. And I think we're in a day and age where, you know, none of us can afford that. Things are just in an accelerated kind of place right now. So that's just the one thing I wanted to mention, because I think property centricity and big data kind of go together. And I just hope that the boards, you know, kind of partner and instead of kind of reinvent the wheel themselves.
So to kind of just piggyback off of that on your question there about the MLS systems and the property centricity that you ask about, most of the time in the database world, MLS systems are called relational databases. So when we actually design Remine is powered by a non-relational database. And that is part of the reason why we're able to layer on so many different data points, especially geodata. So the ability in our side of our program, we can have a virtually unlimited amount of geo-related type of data points so that you can have polygons on top of polygons and latitude and longitudes on top of latitude and longitudes. And that's how you get that conflated you know, map imaging where you can just browse visually and see the data. So.
Just one follow-up question, if I will. Like, what do you do about the privacy issues when the Western states merge into Canada?
to be determined. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. I'll fly back up here. We'll figure it out.
I'd like to thank the panelists for being here and for sharing everything that you have this morning, and I'm going to turn it back over to Cliff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.